Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be discussing issues with tanks in the top lane and how they are almost becoming non-viable or just not played at all in high elo. So I want to address some things quickly before we jump to any conclusions. There are outliers. Mundo and Shen are outliers at the moment. Mundo has just been massively buffed. He is currently broken. He will probably get nerfed again. That wouldn't surprise me, but Mundo and Shen are outliers. Shen for a different reason entirely. Shen has really good map presence and he plays almost like a bruiser rather than a tank. Plus, he has tools within his kit which allow him to get round the issues which the other tanks currently face, such as his W allows him to mitigate auto attack damage, which is where a lot of, well, tank killing potential comes from. So, let's dive into this. Right now, tanks are suffering from one big issue. They aren't really tanky. A lot of their stats are damage. They are mostly being buffed in damage, where they are kind of almost being forced into being buffed into damage because they can't survive long enough within team fights to really feel like tanks at the moment. So they have to do damage to feel meaningful, which ends up in this unhealthy cycle where tanks are more being pushed towards bruisers rather than actual tanks, which is the front line, I won't die, but I won't really do any damage to you class. So, let's move on. Tank items at the moment are in a fucking mess. They just are. Radiant Virtue is basically not it's not built. It's such a niche item, you're rarely gonna see this item built. Heartsteel is... It's a good item, and it's only really good in low elo. Yes, you can abuse it in high elo in certain games, but the games where high elo and pro are mainly going to be focused around, Heartsteel just isn't great. You won't pocket a lot. You won't be able to survive with this item. It curves terribly. It has a really awful time cut. Like your second item when you go Heartsteel is almost hard bound to being either Abyssal or Sunfires, and neither of them feel good to build. You're kind of stunted before you end up with your second item completion, and then it makes you really vulnerable to the damage type which you don't, which you aren't resistant against. Where this is where a lot of problems with Heartsteel comes in. Jackshow is probably the best here out of all of them in most scenarios. It just got nerfed because it was being abused by bruisers, which you're already starting to see some of the problems come through. This item is kind of, well, it was mainly pushed towards tanks which didn't have a lot of resistances. Like, it would be a great second item to Heartsteel because it gives you the resistances you need to survive, but then Jackshow doesn't have any damage. And now you end up with a situation where you're tanky, but you're really vulnerable to damage. Like you don't do damage, so you're really vulnerable in that situation. Which is why bruisers loved it, because bruisers become unkillable. They still do damage. It made it a great item, but now Jackshow's gonna get nerfed. It should get changed, and hopefully we'll start seeing it get pushed more towards the bonus resistances you get. I think the heal needs to go. I think the heal feels meaningless on this item. It's just another stat thrown in there for ridiculous reasons. It shouldn't be there. The item provides literally no wave clear, so unless you go Titanic or Demonic second, you are very, well, just weak towards wave clear. And we've seen how strong wave clear can be. Ravenous, stuff like this, make wave clears really fast. And if you're not going Ravenous or Titanic, you are going to struggle pushing up waves and rotating, which makes this item, well, it will struggle in pro play. If your tank can't clear waves, then you will struggle. Iceborne Gauntlet, it's good. Like, don't get me wrong, this item isn't bad. The problem with Iceborne, though, it's very gated towards armor. Like, you are very gated towards going against, why is my brain not working? You can only build this item against armor heavy comps. If you're building Iceborne into comps where they have a lot of magic resist, it feels really bad. Lots of AP damage. I'm messing up all my words today. Yeah, it feels really bad. So if you're going Iceborne into AP heavy comps, you have to follow it up with a magic resist item, which can feel quite bad. So as much as it isn't a bad item, we've ended up in a situation where when you have a mythic item built towards one resist, when there isn't enough mythic items, then suddenly you're really well, you're very lacking in the amount of mythic options you have. We should have, rather than things like Sunfire Turbo becoming legendary items, which they have, they should have stayed as mythics, because we need more options. When you take our options down like this, it suddenly becomes really awful to play tanks, because a lot of, like, Heartsteel feels good, but the other three feel really bad to build. They don't feel satisfying as a tank, and we're going to see that in a second. So anti-tank items. This is another huge problem at the moment. When high elo, people are going to understand that there's a tank on the enemy team and itemize correctly into the matchup or the game state. These items are really strong into tanks, whereas tanks don't have a lot of lots of options into your damage threats coming in. Oh, they have options into the damage threats coming in, but you can't suddenly have an item which is like, I mitigate percentage health damage, or I mitigate true damage, because these things, well, they wouldn't exist. It wouldn't. But then you would have tanks which are too strong and too tanky, and you need. So the problem is there are so many items within the game in its current state which are anti-tank items, that playing tank into champs which build these items as their core, or just build these items in general, feels almost impossible, because you are suddenly no longer a tank. They will do more damage than you. They will survive for about as much time as you, which is ridiculous to say, but it is true. So it's a bit of a feels bad when your Fiora can go Divine Sundera and kill your 4-item tank, because, well, they're unable to kind of compete against it. The saving grace is obviously Titanic and Demonic. If your champ can go this second item, it is a must, basically. Sunfire's is close, but these two are just by far the best performers. Demonic is really good on burn champs, things like, and burn AP champs, things like your Zax, your Mordekaisers. Really, really strong item on them. Even Tahm Kench now, because he got the changes to help him building this item. Titanic, of course, is really good on your Shens, your Mundos, your Scions, stuff like this. Argot as well. Tanks obviously are becoming less popular, so we're going to see them played less in high elo and pro games, and in turn I think this is the beginning of the end of tanks. Well, as tanks as we know it, because there will be change. They will have to address this problem, because tanks are no longer popular and they're borderline non-viable, which is ridiculous to say. This doesn't apply to jungle tanks. Jungle tanks, I think, because of the way the pets now work, jungle tanks are viable again, and you can actually play jungle tanks with relative success, because they can clear almost as equally or faster than the current jungle meta, which is ridiculous to say, but I mean, that's what they've done to make tanks viable in the jungle, because they were pretty awful. So yeah. And yeah, Fiora's pick rate at the moment is ridiculous. So why would you play one of these champs when you can be playing against Fiora, Camille, Darius, an anti-tank champion, or someone who utilizes the items well? And this comes back to the question is, are tanks no longer viable in high elo? I should have included this, because I think tanks will continue to be viable in low elo. People don't itemize correctly. It's harder to play into tanks which get ahead with Heartsteel, because the top laner is more isolated, and you're going to see less roams, you're going to see less punishers, so your Heartsteel top laner will get more stacks and be more fed and can one-shot AD carries at that point. So tanks are viable in low elo. In fact, they're pretty strong in low elo, almost broken. So we're seeing the biggest divide yet, and it's not good. And this is why I'm talking about it, because I think it needs to be addressed. I think with the current problems, tanks feel bad. Tanks also feel kind of meaningless, and tanks feel borderline non-viable as someone who plays higher up. So it'll be good to see Riot address this. It's wild to discuss it. And thank you guys for watching. I want to be able to start a Patreon at some point so I can do coaching, because I want to do top lane coaching. If you're interested, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.